Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. And in this video, it's all about Russia. So, if that sounds like something that you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. The Southern Russian Front was one of the most violent offensives of World War II, and our city was 90% destroyed by artillery and carpet bombings. So I heard plenty of stories growing up. Most of them were more history related, but some of them are definitely some spooky legends though. The woods around the village that I grew up in are littered with World War II era military stuff from partisan warfare, so people go treasure hunting with metal detectors all the time. In the late 2000s, there were tons of discussions locally about the sites of abandoned German and Soviet forest camps and hiding spots. Apparently there is one area in specific in these woods that is considered what would be in English a dead place by the treasure hunters and mushroom picking enthusiasts. People would often get lost for days when they go there. Some unsolved cases of disappearances too. One of the local old men told me about his experience. So he was a mushroom and berry picking enthusiast, and this was in the late 1990s. He decided to go deep into the woods where the biggest ones grow. He was walking east for hours until the dirt path became overgrown and no longer visible. He stumbled upon the most plentiful spot. He picked a basketful of porcini mushrooms and a bucket of wild raspberries. It was already getting dark, so he figured it was time to go. He was heading back in anticipation of the amount of preserves that he would make for winter time. At some point, he realized that he was going the wrong way, even though it should be the right way, judging by the sun position. He ended up walking in circles for more than an hour, trying to pass through this thicket. No matter which direction he picked to walk in, he would always end up at the same spot. He tried shouting, but there was no one near him. He was giving up and preparing to spend the night in the wild. I mean, he had plenty of food after all. And then suddenly, he hears people talking, playing accordion, and laughing, off in the distance. He goes toward the direction of the sound. He hears a crackling of fire as he gets closer. He saw some light flickering through the thick overgrowth. He exhales in relief and announces his presence before approaching the site, so as to not to scare people. But the voices go silent. The accordion stops. The fire is quickly extinguished. It becomes pitch black. He hears rumbling and sees branches move in the dim moonlight. A man comes around the bushes and slowly approaches, pointing a knife at him. He's wearing a weird grayish suit and knee-high boots. He's very mad and very nervous. He starts talking, almost breaking into shouting. He's very confused as to what the hell is going on. But then he realizes he's speaking German. The old man thinks, okay, I've studied some German during my time in the army. He asks who you are and how you got here. The old man tells him that he got lost. He's just wanting to know which way the road is. The man turns his head back and shouts the English equivalent of, "He's Russian, we found him," into the bushes, and then charges at the old man. He heard more footsteps approaching him. He dropped the basket and began to run as fast as he humanly could. But then, no one's following him. Everybody's gone. He still hears the shouting off in the distance, getting closer. Gunshots are fired, but they sound off. The man realizes that the funny gray suit was a Nazi military uniform. The wind starts whistling and bending around the branches. It's so loud that the voices are muffled out, even the gunshots. As he was running, a branch fell on top of him, knocked him out cold. And then he came to his senses when it's bright out. The man looks around and realizes that he's now at the border of the woods and there are familiar houses nearby. Confused, he walks home. People in the street see that his face is bleeding and ask him, where has he been? What happened? He shoves them away because he's too tired to answer questions. He just says, I think Germans almost got me. People laughed at him and say that he should stop drinking. His wife scolded him for scaring her and losing the wicker basket that she made. The rumor goes around the village that you're an alcoholic who drank so much that he started to see things. Now, he only drank twice a year, on his birthday and on New Year's, but the rumors persisted. And that's his story about how he ran into ghost Nazis and almost got shot for finding their camp. Growing up, I spent a lot of time in rural Russia with my grandparents. The village was kind of secluded and surrounded by pine and oak woods, with a small lake and a cemetery on the sides. The atmosphere there was exceptionally magical and eerie when the fog came down on cold nights. The locals were extremely spiritual and superstitious. Years ago, though, I left for a job offer in Moscow right after my grandfather's death, and I only managed to come back and visit on a holiday leave. So visiting his grave again reignited many memories from my childhood and teenage years, so I decided I would share them for the sake of it. Over the years that I've spent there, I had heard many stories told by the elderly and experienced some strange and paranormal events myself. So, here we go. The first thing that comes to mind is how my grandfather used to lose his shit and get mad whenever we did anything remotely fun during thunderstorms. So, this is more when I was a kid. It's pouring rain outside, thundering and lightning. I decide to fix myself a snack. My grandfather comes in. He says, you mustn't glutton during thunderstorms. I think, oh, okay. So I sit down and I play cards with my cousins. My grandfather comes in again, scolds us, and takes away the cards. We start goofing around the house, doing noisy kid stuff. My grandfather once again comes in. He says, this is no way to behave yourself during thunderstorms. Frustrated, I ask my grandfather why, and he tells a story from his old village that his mother used to tell him. It was the early 1930s. This was in a small, now non-existent village in Bryansk Oblast. It started to rain, and no more work could be done in the fields. People gathered in a local hub for a dance night. Men brought booze and snacks to make the night fun. There's accordion playing, women singing, and telling spicy chastushki, which are Russian short folk songs, usually vulgar or comedic in nature. It's time to dance in pairs. As they are dancing, there's a middle-aged woman who has no partner, so she sits down to get blasted instead. She grabs a wooden icon of Christ, and she begins drunkenly dancing around the room, shouting, I've got a partner, I've got a partner, and everybody laughs. The thunder roars. It gets so bad, and everything shakes to the point where people begin to fall down. The room goes quiet. Everybody gets up, except this woman. They go over and check on her. She lies, stiff, with the icon in her hands. Her eyes are wide open, not blinking. She's not breathing. two men take the icon away from her hands. The wooden icon has her black handprints burned into it. My grandfather ended the story by saying, "Heavy rain and thunder is Christ crying for our souls, so acting like a fool is disrespectful. That's why you never, ever act foolish during thunderstorms." And ever since then, even now, I tend to read books when it starts to pour rain. These are in no particular order, but another one that kind of gives me chills to look back on is some stuff that happened when I was a teenager. Older people in the village, despite being very Christian, still believe in spirits like the Domovoy. In the Slavic mythos, he's a neutral spirit who inhabits most households and watches over them. If you are respectful toward him, your house will always be safe, and he will warn you if anything bad is going to happen. If not, he will cause trouble and scare you at night until you come to your senses and start treating him well. In some cases, he may even force you to leave your house for good so that better owners can move in. If you don't invite him in with a certain ritual when building your house, he will not enter at all, and it will be much easier for evil spirits to move in and take his place. For example, my grandmother used to leave a small bowl of milk on the shelf for Domovoy every other weekend. She and my mother used to tell stories about a dark, shadowy figure that sat on their chest at night when they forgot to do so for a long time. Now for me, I grew up to about 190 centimeters before my cardiovascular system could adjust when I hit puberty, so getting sleep paralysis was a very common thing. Sometimes I would even get 3 to 5 of those in a week, so I laughed at their stories and told them the medical implications of this occurrence, like a teenage smartass that I was. And then, a couple of years later, I noticed a pattern that made me doubt that I was really that smart. You see, when I got sleep paralysis in the city apartment where we lived when it was school time, there was no consistency in the figures I would see. Sometimes there were fat, shadowy people. Sometimes it was a humanoid with very long legs. Sometimes it would be a worm-like creature, disfigured animals, and large insects. Sometimes I would just be staring into the corner when I can't move. Sometimes feeling like something is sitting on me, or somebody is running around the room. It was scary the first dozen or so times, but then I learned to go with the flow until I wake up, like you would do in a regular nightmare. Sleep paralysis bros probably know what I mean. However, in the village, I would barely get sleep paralysis, and the only times I did, I would see the same figure. Either no visuals whatsoever, or a small childlike figure with black fur and big, yellowish glowing eyes. And the fur was always messy, like you would see on an old street dog. During the first encounter, I didn't mind it at all, because by that point, I had gotten used to seeing these kinds of figures. But then, after not having sleep paralysis for a while, and then getting it again, and it being the same thing every time, I started feeling uneasy and leaving the night lamp on somewhere around the 5th time, seeing this hairy thing in my room. Then there was this time that I was home alone for an extended period because my grandparents had to run some errands in the city. A week passes. I've had like 8 sleep paralysis just that week. There were bags under my eyes because of bad sleep. I was starting to see things in the corners of my eyes, even when awake. I would be minding my own business and doing regular stuff, but slightly paranoid. And then night comes. I go to sleep with a night lamp on. The sleep paralysis happens. The Domovoy climbs onto the bed like a small child and sits on my chest, staring at me with his yellowish, glowing eyes. I can't breathe. I try to scream, but I can't. Usual sleep paralysis stuff. But then, I'm able to jump up out of the bed. I'm in a cold sweat. My head is dizzy. I stay awake, watching the TV the whole night to calm my nerves. I fell asleep at dawn and slept till noon, and then I called my parents to come pick me up. My mother asks what's wrong. I ask her what the Domovoy that strangled her looked like. She said it was a childlike figure with messy fur and big, yellow, glowing eyes. I hope this is a coincidence. She says that they will come pick me up in a couple of days anyways. Then I call my grandmother. I tell her I love her. In my opinion, this is how real men start a conversation with their babushkas, and you should do this too if you're hearing it. I asked my babushka what the Domovoy that strangled her looked like. She said it was a childlike figure with messy fur and big, yellow, glowing eyes. She asks me why I'm curious. I lie and tell her that I just remembered the story and that I was just curious. And then I could almost feel her smirking through the phone. She said, "He's messing with you, isn't he?" And then I admit, yes, he is. She said, "Get him some milk and put it in a bowl. He probably misses us since we've been away for a while." I finish the conversation. I hang up. I leave some milk on the shelf like my grandmother advised. That night, I get a small amount of sleep paralysis, but nothing happens. There's no being present. The Domovoy isn't present. Within a couple of minutes, I peacefully go back to sleep. The bowl of milk seems untouched, but I still doubted everything I believed the following morning, and from then on, I never got sleep paralysis there again. I kind of wonder what would happen if I eventually go back to the old house. My babushka moved into the city, and my family has left it for 3 years. Not to sound cheesy, but our Domovoy is probably very lonely, or he's having a blast while we're away. Growing up, I always loved hearing stories about cryptids and the like, so I was pretty excited, as you can imagine, when I recently found out that my late grandfather had an encounter with something when he and my father lived back in the Soviet Union. I don't know the exact nature of the call, but my granddad was an electrical engineer. He got called to a town near the shores of the Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is known for, among other things, being fed by 330 rivers, but emptying only into one, having an incredible ecosystem of thousands of species, half of which are only found there, being the deepest lake in the world, being the biggest lake in the world by surface area, and being the oldest lake in the world, as well as being the center of all manner of legends and creepy shit. So my grandfather arrives by the time it's getting dark, so the client insists that he stay the night in the Gostinitsa, but not before inviting him for supper. Over the meager meal, they discuss details of the problem and possible solutions. As the sky darkens, the client makes an odd remark that sounds out of place coming from the mouth of such a fellow. He said, "Do take care not to leave your room in the Gostinitsa during the night. There are creatures out there." After checking how much vodka the client had drank, my grandfather asks him what he means, and after a little hesitation and a request for him not to talk about this to any officials, the client obliges my grandfather. Around the forests, we find huge mounds of droppings with whole skeletons intact, of sizes of everything between and including wolves, to bears. These shit mounds are left by giant snakes that live in the lake. Now, you wouldn't think a snake would want to venture out into the freezing cold lake, although it would make a great deal of sense for such a creature to reside in burrows deep underground, some of which may lead into the lake. Reports of sightings of the creatures are only heard once or twice a year, he said, compared to the often seen mounds because, well, human bones, too, fall under the purview of everything in between. And when a set of bones is found, reports of a missing person from as far as a few towns over are never that far behind. But try not to think too much about what I've just told you. Just stay in your room for the night, and do have a good night's rest. My grandfather had a little trouble not thinking about this as he made his way to his room that night, as he frankly thought it was just a story. He even said that he thought it stank of giant snake shit. So, giving the whole silly thing no more thought, he changed into his nightclothes and swung open the room window to let a cool breeze in. He studied the schematics a little longer until he was satisfied that he had figured it out, and then got up to extinguish the light to get some sleep. Turning toward his bed in the now dark room, he sees, peeking through the open window, the head of a huge snake, illuminated by pale moonlight. Its further tongue is flicking up and down. As any sane man would do, he ran into the closet and shut the door behind him. For not more than 20 seconds, he heard the most infernal thrashing of wood against wood and leathery flesh, and of papers and bed covers being whipped around at breakneck speeds. That small time felt like an eternity to him, as did the minute or so until he heard rapping on his room's door and a man's voice. "What the hell is going on in there? You've woken everybody up, and I've called the police." My grandfather rushed out of the closet, through the wrecked room, and out into the hallway, slamming the door behind him. He gets accosted by the owner until the police arrive, who inspect the room, or what was left of it. Papers are all about. The furniture is reduced to splinters, and the bed covers were nowhere in sight. My grandfather collected his few remaining things, and as per police's orders, was given a different room for the night. One of them stepped aside to talk to my grandfather. He said, "Don't open your window again. We don't want to come back here again tonight to recover a body, or worse." The rest of the trip went largely uneventful. My grandfather fixed the problem and promptly returned to Ukraine, where he and my father, then in his early youth, lived. But my grandfather did bring one thing back. On a trip to the Museum of Natural History, he brought it between the pages of a book, meaning, I figure anyways, that it was probably a scale of some kind. My grandfather shows it to the curator, who shows great interest in it. My grandfather relates the story of how he got it, as the curator inspects it excitedly. The curator asks if he can hang on to it to conduct some research, and ensures my grandfather that he'll show him his findings. My grandfather accepts and parts with the thing, but the curator never did get back to him. But my grandfather did get back to the curator, after having a great deal of difficulty finding him again. The curator responded almost angrily when questioned about the item and his research on it. He said something along the lines of, "That thing that you brought me was a total hoax and nothing more. I've decided I want nothing to do with the damned thing, and I suggest that you decide the same. And that essentially concludes the story. Now, the strangest thing about this story, at least to me, is that before hearing it, I had heard all sorts of strange goings-on in and around Lake Baikal, but never anything like this. The only thing relatively close was a single isolated mention of the possibility of a plesiosaur type thing entering the ecosystem through one of the 330 rivers feeding the lake, since one of those things could possibly be mistaken as a giant snake. But there's just about nothing else, no other mentions. It's quite the peculiar affair, isn't it? What's hiding or being hidden at Lake Baikal? So I hope you enjoyed those, and if you did, and had a specific one that you liked the most, let me know which one it was. And if you would like to donate to the channel, or send in a story of your own, I have an email in the description, as well as a PayPal and a Patreon. And of course, there's super thanks here on YouTube. But with that, I'd like to say thank you to all of the condolences I got about my cat. I was just floored to see that many people had their own story about a pet that they loved that they had to let go of. And I also showed my mom the people that wished her a happy birthday. She was very happy about that. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for watching the videos and subscribing and all that stuff. It's really cool, the little community that we have here. And with that, I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.